have already been 9 in-season firings at FBS schools this season.
Penn State fired head football coach James Franklin.
Michigan State has fired head coach Jonathan Smith.
Is there no way we can get rid of him?
Not without cause, Michael.
I have cause. It is because I hate him.
Brian Kelly is out.
Auburn parting ways with Hugh Freeze after a very difficult final game there.
Mark Stoops.
Billy Napier.
Sam Pittman.
Mike Gundy fired.
It is an absolutely incredible time to be a college football coach, especially if you get fired. LSU fires Brian Kelly. To fire him, they have to pay him $54 million. Doesn't matter, they do it anyway. Kentucky has to pay Mark Stoops $38 million to fire him. Michigan State, $33 million to Jonathan Smith. This happens almost every year. We're just a few years removed from Texas A&M having to pay Jimbo Fisher $78 million to fire him. You might think that these colleges would see these failures, these multi-million-dollar embarrassments, and think to themselves, hey, maybe we shouldn't promise $70 million to coaches when we're not doing such a great job of making these hires. Maybe we should take it easy. Maybe we should slow down. Nope, that's never how it works in college football. The money continues to go up and up and up and up. Like at LSU, right after they fire Brian Kelly and have to pay him $54 million, the governor of the state has a press conference and says the next contract will be structurally different. They're not going to leave themselves in a position where they have to pay a huge buyout. Wrong. Liar. Instead, they signed Lane Kiffin to a 7-year, $90 million contract that pays him $14 million a year and makes him the second highest paid coach in college football. All sorts of huge contracts all over college football throughout this ridiculous cycle. Even at Missouri, they are going to pay Eli Drinkwitz, who has never won an SEC championship or been to an SEC championship game, a coach who is 26-24 in SEC play. They are going to pay him $11 million to stay at Missouri. It makes me feel like I'm losing my mind because the sport of college football is changing. We're seeing different teams succeed using different strategies. And so often we're seeing programs that used to be powerhouses of the sport flailing and unsure what to do. And yet, even though the economic model of the sport has changed, these schools continue to try to follow the same strategy of finding a coach/god to pay tens of millions of dollars a year in hopes that that will bring them football success. Even when we're seeing on the field in recent years that the sport doesn't work that way anymore. Now, complaining about college football coaching salaries is not a new thing. It's been happening for decades, even back before the coaches were making millions of dollars. Just as proof to show you that people have been complaining about college football coaching salaries for a while, here is the Birmingham News from the day after Alabama hired Nick Saban. We have someone complaining that at $4 million that Nick Saban is making too much money, which is like a joke nowadays. We are nominating this for the coldest take of all time. As it turns out, hiring Nick Saban would actually be the best economic choice the University of Alabama ever made. A spectacular investment. Back in 2006, Alabama was making $43 million in football revenue. Then they win a bunch of championships. Nick Saban turns them into the premier program in the sport. Last year, they made $140 million in football revenue. $100 million more than before they got him. But it's really even bigger than that. It's not just the ticket sales. It's not just the bowl payouts. Alabama's football success fundamentally changed the entire university. Back in 2006, Alabama had about 6,000 undergraduates coming from outside of the state. Today, they have 22,000 students coming from outside of the state. They pay about 3 times as much in tuition as Alabama residents. That's hundreds of millions of dollars per year. No offense, like, they're not coming for the biology department. They're coming because Alabama football made Alabama a national brand. So, all this to say, I'm not complaining about the general concept of coaching salaries. Hiring Nick Saban was a decision that made the University of Alabama and the state of Alabama literally billions of dollars. At the time of his retirement, Saban was making $11 million a year. They honestly could have paid him $100 million and I'd still be like, that's a bargain. But the sport of college football has changed. You see, that made sense because it happened during the old model of college football, where famously, you were not allowed to pay money to players to play for your college football team. They couldn't even be in advertisements or anything. And so for decades, the richest programs in college football got good at solving a very specific problem: how to turn your piles of cash into things that would entice recruits to play for your college football team. You know, you built a massive, impressive football facility that was gleaming, and, you know, it had Xboxes at every locker, and there was a waterfall. You know, you threw these big, fun recruiting events when you hosted them. You know, you paid thousands of dollars for the balloon display. Teams got really good at figuring out all these ways to spend money on football players without actually spending money on football players. But the most effective way to do this was to pay a lot of money to a good college football coach. There's a famous saying in football. It's not about the X's and O's. It's about the Jimmies and the Joes. The gist of it is, it's more important to have good players than it is to have good schemes, strategies, game plans, etc. I bring this up because for most of college football history, the head coach was actually in charge of both. This made college football coaches hugely important, much more important than an NFL head coach who has to deal with a general manager who actually picks the team. And under that model, it made sense to pay college football coaches their weight in gold. For example, Nick Saban. He's not only one of the best regarded defensive minds of all time, a guy who invented countless schemes that are used on every level of the sport. He was also a tireless recruiter, a guy who packed Alabama with 5-star blue chip prospects year after year after year, a guy who complained when his team went to the national championship that he was missing out on time on the recruiting trail. There have been college football coaches who have won national championships that, quite frankly, were not that good at actually coaching football, did not push the game forward through innovative strategies, but were charismatic, were likable, were able to get the top prospects to come and play for their football team. Like I said, the Jimmies and the Joes, more important than the X's and O's. And then, in the past few years of the sport, this entirely changed. You can just pay the players. You can give them money directly into their bank accounts. It's so much less important for coaches to be good at recruiting because you can literally just pay them money. The fancy facilities, the charismatic coach, that just doesn't matter as much anymore. People act like this change is unprecedented and that they have to solve this unknowable riddle that has never been solved before. But that's wrong. Every pro team on earth has a front office with a general manager and with cap analysts and with analytic guys, and they've reached a conclusion. Players are worth so much more than coaches. The highest paid coach in the NFL is Andy Reid. He's a legend, he has won multiple Super Bowls, and the Chiefs pay him $20 million a year. The best player on the Chiefs, Patrick Mahomes, makes about $50 million a year. The NFL salary cap is $279 million. In the NBA, the highest paid head coach is Steve Kerr of the Golden State Warriors. Again, won multiple NBA championships. They pay him $17.5 million reportedly. Again, the best player on the Warriors is Steph Curry. He makes a lot more than Steve Kerr. He makes over $50 million a year. In the NHL, the highest paid coach is Rangers coach Mike Sullivan. I'll be honest, I don't know anything about hockey, but I assume he's good if they're paying him money. They're paying him about $6.5 million a year. The NHL salary cap is $96 million. Remarkably, the ratio is consistent. My point is, all these leagues have this exact same situation where there is a limit on how much they can spend on players and no limit on how much they can spend on coaches. And all of them independently came to the same conclusion that a great head coach is worth about 7% of a team's salary. Of course, there is one major American sport that does not have a salary cap: Major League Baseball. Dave Roberts is the highest paid MLB manager. He recently received an extension that brings his salary up to $8.1 million, which is well deserved. Actually, I don't think Dodgers fans agree with that, but whatever, they won the World Series. The Dodgers payroll, though, this year was $350 million. Dave Roberts makes 2% of the Dodgers' total payroll. Which brings us to college football. In 2024, there were a lot of reports that Ohio State spent $20 million on their roster, and people acted like this was unbelievable. People were like, oh my God, $20 million. That is so much money to spend on a team. Meanwhile, the highest paid head coach last year was Kirby Smart, who made $13 million. That's 65% of the highest roster payroll in the sport. To get across how absurd I think this is, let's translate it to the NFL. Let's say the Kansas City Chiefs decided to pay Andy Reid a salary equivalent to 65% of the highest payroll in the NFL. That would be like paying Andy Reid $176 million per year. They don't do that because that would be stupid. There is no need for a head coach to make 60% of the salaries of the players on his team. And yet, in college football, we've just taken it as rational that it's ridiculous for players to make more than coaches when every sport on earth says the exact opposite. This is an economic system that is totally out of whack. This is an economic system that makes no sense. Teams are wildly misallocating their resources. It would be one thing if these teams had the money, but clearly they don't. The Big Ten is trying to take on private equity funds. Teams are changing conferences, destroying 100-year-old rivalries to increase their TV payouts by $10, $15 million a year. So let's look at the top 16 salaries in college football this year. Of the names of that list, you'd expect there to be a lot of success. Instead, we have 4 teams that made the college football playoff. That's Ohio State, Georgia, Alabama, and Ole Miss. Complicated, but we're counting it. And then you have 5 teams that either finished below 500 or fired their head coach as a result of how bad their season was. That's North Carolina, Colorado, Penn State, LSU, and Kentucky. So you are more likely from these top 16 salaries on this list to have had a hugely embarrassing season than you were to have succeeded. But you can also flip this and look at the strategies that are actually working. In the college football playoff rankings, look at some of the teams that are thriving. We have Indiana, which paid Curt Cignetti the 18th highest salary in the sport this year. Texas Tech, which did not give a lot of money to their head coach, Joey McGuire. He has the 51st highest salary in college football this year. They gave a lot of money to the players instead. It turns out that's important. Texas A&M, which learned their lesson from the Jimbo Fisher buyout. They didn't give Mike Elko a huge salary when he first came to Texas A&M. He has the 32nd highest salary in college football. I thought that these on-field results over the last few years would be a huge wake-up call to the people with money in college football. I thought they would realize that they need to take some of these millions and millions they're giving to coaches and spending way more of it on players and player acquisition. And yet, it feels like the people in charge of the sport are doubling down. They are thinking to themselves, oh my God, we need to spend even more money on our coaches to show that we're serious at football, to attract the donors who can give to our program so that we can get the players. But we can all see what's happening. We can see that this old model is failing, that there is no justification for continuing to increase these coaching salaries. And it feels like these teams have to realize, they have to look at it and say, we are going down a path that no longer exists. We are following the old model of the sport, or they can keep going down this path and keep giving bigger and bigger and bigger salaries to these coaches and continue throwing money at a problem that their poorer opponents have already solved.